What is the difference between a GAPS diet and specific carbohydrate diet? I get asked this question a lot, and so today I'm going to be going over the differences and the similarities between the two diets and how you might decide which one might be best for you. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 3 of Digestible Dialogues. I am Sherry Lip, the founder of Happy Gut for Life and host of this podcast. And today I'm going to be diving deeper into GAPS diet and a CD diet and exploring the differences and similarities between the two. So a CD diet, that is specific carbohydrate diet, that is the diet that I started over 20 years ago, and the diet that brought me into this managed state of remission with Crohn's disease. And then GAPS diet is an offshoot of that. It came out of a CD, and a GAP stands for Gut and Psychology Syndrome. And so this is the GAPS book. You can see it's pretty thick here. And then we have Breaking the Vicious Cycle, which is all about a CD diet. And so I really highly recommend, if you are exploring diet and you have IBD or other digestive issues, that you really look into both of these. There's just a wealth of information out there. And last podcast, I was talking about IBD-AID. That's worth looking at too, because I just think the more information you have, the better. And as always, this is not medical advice. This is based on my experiences and my own research, but it's not medical advice to tell you what to do. It's just to provide just more information, as you can never really have too much information when it comes to your health. So, GAPS diet. So GAPS diet was started by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, and she was really looking at the gut-brain connection when it comes to our health. And so GAPS diet really, that's why it's called gut and psychology syndrome. It really gets you really into the mental health aspect of it. So if you're looking at ADHD or autism or even depression, definitely, GAPS diet, gets really into that. Whereas, Breaking the Vicious Cycle does get into that, but it's not as much. That was not Elaine's focus. Elaine's focus was on helping digestive health and digestive, more specifically, inflammation related to IBD. That was her focus. So, it's two different focuses, both kind of with the same goal in mind, which is to rebalance our microbiome. So when we're talking about the differences, I think that the differences that GAPS diet, when I talk to people about it, one of the big differences is just kind of a mindset. The mindset with GAPS is that it is a nutritional therapy that we will move through, and there's different phases. So that's one of the big differences, is that there is a more intensive intro phase to GAPS than there is to SCD diet. And then there are phases to move through. And then the goal is that you're going to be reintroducing more foods than is anticipated that people reintroduce on SCD diet. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a second here, because there's actually a little bit to do with kind of the communities that surround these diets. But GAPS has that more intense intro phase where they are focusing on fermented foods, bone broth, some gut healing foods, some known gut healing foods. Whereas SCD has an intro diet that's just a few days, and then and then there are some recommendations for like kind of food preparation and what foods you may or might not want to introduce while you have active symptoms. But it's not mapped out into phases. And there are pros and cons to each of those methods. Some people really like to have phases, so that would be something to consider. And some people, like for me, I could eat most of the SCD allowable foods right away, so I didn't really need phases. The other thing is, I think that phases can, if your diet is too regimented, I think that a phase might trip somebody up in the fact that you're like, well, what if it's not working? The thing about all diets with IBD is there's not any magic formula. And so I think some people might interpret the phases as kind of that formula, like if I do this, it's gonna work. And there's so many foods that just don't work for some people. And so that could be a source of disappointment. So there's kind of, so part of it mindset. So you got to really explore your own mindset. And that's where, as a holistic gut health coach, I get into the whole big picture, because it's so important. Our mindset is so important. And it's important to know that what other people are doing may not be what is going to be what you need to do. So I think that that's a big phase. And so, like I said, there is a lot of information in all these books about, the science of it and how our digestive systems work. And I think the thing with the GAPS diet is that because we have learned so much more about that gut-brain connection, which is touched upon in Breaking the Vicious Cycle, like I was saying in the last podcast about when I was talking about SCD and IBD-AID, which also grew out of SCD. I mean, SCD is the foundation, but research continues, and so what are we looking at? So, with GAPS, we are looking at more at the neurological aspect of things. And so the focus, it may not be for as much with IBD, and I think that's what makes SCD very attractive to people who have IBD, is that it was created solely for that purpose of managing and hopefully eliminating those symptoms of IBD. So when it comes to, okay, what we're doing the diet, we've chosen, where do we go as we're moving past our nutritional therapy portion? We've achieved remission, or at least a severe lessening of symptoms. So where do you go? So with SCD, that is probably one of the biggest points of confusion among people who follow it. GAPS has more of a gear towards getting off of it. It's not necessarily meant to be a permanent for life diet. It's not written that way. Both of them have the idea that you won't go back to just the standard ultra-processed foods, refined sugars, refined grains, lots of additives, and stuff like that. Both diets encourage not doing that, because those are the things that can trigger inflammation in your body. So I think that's part of the thing. So GAPS has that motivation to move beyond, where you're gonna how do you incorporate in a healthy diet that's beyond the therapy part of it. SCD doesn't really have that as much. Besides saying, let's not go back to some unhealthy habits, some unhealthy things that are known to be triggers for IBD, such as a high sugar diet. But it doesn't really, there's some discouragement amongst the SCD community to ever go off SCD. So that's a huge difference. I would love to hear from people who follow GAPS and see, what the mindset within the GAPS community is, because since I began with SCD, GAPS wasn't even in existence when I started SCD. And so I don't think, if it was, I was even less known than SCD. But I have reached a point of healing, so I didn't need to, I look at GAPS, but I haven't had to do it, from a beginning phase into a healing process, because I was already in the healing phase. So my experience with GAPS is more research-based than practical usage. So I would love to hear from people doing GAPS, and what their thoughts are on, like, where do you go after you've reached your healing, after you've reached a point of healing, or at least a good reduction of your symptoms, and you want to start looking at other foods, because within the SCD community, there is a fairly large group of people who are encouraging to never go off the diet. Like, SCD is SCD, and that's what you do. I'm not really with that. I think there are lots of nutritional benefits to foods outside of SCD. I think part of with SCD, the non-SCD foods of all kinds are kind of considered or thought about in the same way, even though there's a wide variety of foods, of healthy foods that are not SCD. And so that's, for me, that's what I look at as, like, it's a whole food. It's got some health benefits that I might be missing out on if I don't have it. And that was kind of where I made some of my choices. GAPS has a very similar thing, actually kind of introducing some of those same foods that I was looking at when I was looking to get beyond SCD. And one of the big ones I see with GAPS, because I see a lot of GAPS recipes, and there's a lot of chocolate-based ones. And I think that's a huge appeal for people, because, I mean, for some, chocolate has a great power. And people, it's a big draw. People are like, I need to have it, and that's not just a lack of willpower. I mean, good food is good food, and actually chocolate is, I find it to be actually a kind of a comforting food as far as, like, feeling better when you have it. If you have a high quality chocolate, and not having very much of it, I find that I can have a little bit, and that's very satisfying, because when I'm talking about chocolate, I'm not talking about going to the store and buying a candy bar. I'm talking about something homemade where I'm using a high quality unsweetened cocoa, and I'm making a high quality candy or dessert with it, or I've actually added a little bit of chili or and stuff to do, like, more of a mole. And so those are high quality things that are very satisfying in small amounts. But I will get into that kind of thing a little in a future podcast about, like, how you incorporate some new foods, because that is something I get asked a lot when people come to my private group or kind of towards me with questions, is like, how do you start doing this? I think that's one of the differences. So there are people who want to stay on a CD forever, and that's a choice. There are a lot of people who are like, I need to expand, and there's a lot of reasons for that too, because there are other health conditions that may require a broader diet. There are health reasons that some of the SCD foods might not work for you, and so you're over restricted because you're eliminated so many foods, and so maybe you need to look beyond that. So there are so many choices out there, and so for me, it's finding the right ones and saying that it's okay. And that is one thing with groups of what, when you're on a diet, is not to get too focused on what other people are doing. So one thing I see a lot is somebody will be very specific in the group, like, have you tried this and did it work for you? And so, and really, it does not matter what has worked for me or any other person, because there could be a food, an SCD food or a non-SCD food, or in the GAPS arena, that somebody's like, it works for every other person. If it's like, I did great with this particular food, and then you don't. I mean, it is possible that you're one of the ones that is just, in the small group, that something's just not working for, and there may be something else that works for you. And so I don't want people to get too hung up in what other people do when it comes to very specific foods. I'm going to the groups and getting some guidance on how to do the phases and how to do that's with GAPS, or how to, especially with SCD, since there isn't a lot of guidance on what to eat and when. I think, kind of getting some general guidelines can be very helpful. There is some in the book, but it's hard to remember everything that the book said. You're in the real world practicing this, and you wanna see what other people do in general. I think that's great. I think there's a lot of support there. I think some over reliance on very specific foods and asking questions about very specific foods is probably not as helpful and productive as we think it's going to be, because it doesn't, somebody's like, I do great with black beans, and you're like, well, I can't eat them, or you're like, oh great, and then you have it and you don't feel well, I just, you got to be very careful with that kind of thing. So I think that when it comes down to it, choosing what works for you, I think, you got to take a look at like the big picture of these diets and say, this appeals to me or this doesn't appeal to me. And don't let peer pressure influence you. Don't feel like you're doing something wrong because you're looking at something else. You got to do what works best for you. And I think that's where it comes down to. There's a difference in mindset, a difference in philosophy when it comes to these diets. And one is not necessarily better than the other, but it might be for you. So when it comes down to it, I would love to hear, like, how do you make your decision about what diet you want to follow, and where are you at when it comes to the big picture process. So you're in the nutritional therapy phase, and you're achieving some results. What influences your decision about where you're going to go from there? Are you sticking with it? And the thing is, I said for a long time that I was going to stick with this 100% forever and ever, and that didn't work out for me. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And if you're in that mindset right now, I'm never going to leave this, or if you're in that, I need to think about other things, or if you have a need for other things and you're kind of worried about that. I think there's a lot of fear when it comes to introducing new foods, and I'd love to hear about that too. So leave a comment, and do not forget to subscribe, because then you'll get the next episode. And the next episode, I will be talking about my controversial opinion on bifidobacteria and SCD diet. So be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video and our next podcast.